Hello guys and welcome to the video of the week number 4. If my calculations go correctly, even though I am doing this video during the permanent assembly, I expect that by the time that you are able to watch this, classes are back to normal. Okay. Anyways, my best wishes as usual. I hope that everything's going well on your side. And well, we're going to start with the contents and with the activities of the week number 4. As usual, I would like to share a poem with you. This time we're going to read this one by Cesar Vallejo. He's a Latin American poet, and I really like this one for some particular reasons that I will briefly discuss in a moment. This is called El poeta a su amada. Amada, en esta noche tú te has sacrificado sobre los dos maderos curvados de mi beso. Y tu pena me ha dicho que Jesús ha llorado y que hay un Viernes Santo más dulce que ese beso. En esta noche rara que tanto me has mirado, la muerte ha estado alegre y ha cantado a su hueso. En esta noche de septiembre se ha oficiado mi segunda caída y el más humano beso. Amada, moriremos los dos juntos, muy juntos. Se irá secando a pausas nuestra excelsa amargura y habrá tocado a sombra nuestros labios difuntos. Y ya no habrá reproches en tus ojos benditos, ni volveré a ofenderte, y en una sepultura los dos nos dormiremos como dos hermanitos. Well, I really like this poem for different reasons. Well, the first one is it has like very, let's say, rural vocabulary in some cases, or let's say not completely formal, such as septiembre, right, instead of septiembre, or this word that is together, no, Viernes Santo. But more than that, it is because Cesar Vallejo tends to be a really dark poet. He's always discussing about depression and a gloomy environment and a really, let's say, sad let's say ensemble of circumstances. It's pretty persistent on his works. So this is one of the few poems in which you can see some sort of hope for love, right? Even though he's using allusions and symbolisms that are related to dark things such as death and bones and the graveyard, right? He indeed, in his own twisted way, is able to transmit a little bit of these feelings. Now, if you read this very quickly, it may sound like he's inviting to make some sort of suicidal pact with his couple, but that's not the case, or at least that is not the way I understand it. It is more like how we are able to be in love with somebody, or to be in the company of somebody until the day of our deaths. And how in the end everybody's the same, right? We're like brothers and sisters when we're in the tomb, right? When we're in our graves. Well, there's nothing that really separates us, money or social classes or beauty or anything like that, right? In the end, thanks to that, we're all the same. Okay, guys. So let's start with this week's content, and well, remember that we're dealing with description. In the last week's session, the last thing that we were supposed to be doing was this diagram that you will find in the slide number 41, in which we sort of mention some of the components that are going to be useful for us at the time of writing a description. So this diagram per se is not really a description, it is like an instrument in order to write one. And we sort of, let's say, dedicated some time to do this in a physical way, right? As I mentioned, in the future we're going to use this same format somehow, or diagram, in order to create descriptions for intangible things or for emotions or things like that, right? You might remember, especially the ones who were with me in composition, that I all the time said that we were going to go deeper into these things when we were in Formas. Well, now we're in Formas, so we will be going deeper, and we will be checking some instrumentalities and techniques and ideas that make or may have the potential of making our descriptions much better and much more professional and much somehow comprehensive. Well, if you go to the slide number 42, we will see that there are different things that can be described, right? Such as people, things, places, behaviors, attitudes. That is like the most general categories that we can describe. In each one of those, let's say there are certain subdivisions, right? So just think about people. So you can think about genetic way of describing people, or you can describe professions, or you can describe people in terms of let's say their appearance or the uniforms, what they wear, their hair, etc. Right? Same for behaviors, for places. You can describe natural places or artificial ones like constructions made by men. Attitudes, and in terms of things, that is a very general category. So you can think about maybe objects, machines, vehicles, well, a ton of different things. Now, when you are going to describe, you're supposed to have certain things into account. Yeah, so if you go to the slide number 43, the idea is that you keep in mind these skills, yes, when you are going to be describing, like under the categories that we will use from now on, right? So the first one has to do with describing everything that we mentioned in the previous slide, keeping up with, let's say, detail, right? Somehow we're going to try to be as detailed as possible in our descriptions in Formas. And of course, something that is expectable for you at this level, that is, you're supposed to use correct vocabulary, like depending on the context and depending on the categories that you're going to describe. You are supposed to use a certain amount of vocabulary or a certain specialization of vocabulary, even if it's technical or certain things. No, that would be, please don't forget about that, because everything that we're doing is connected, nothing is isolated. Yes. So when we're talking about the components of discourse, remember that we have components such as the cognitive, sociocultural, and so on and so forth, right? So include that into your descriptions. Sometimes, and especially at the beginning, you will require to think about that, but hopefully you will eventually do this naturally. Yes, without thinking it a lot, you will describe certain things since the technical point of view, or including any relevant sociocultural component or linguistic, well, etc. Right? So it's important to take that into account. Now, sometimes, and of course this also depends on the type of discourse, you might want to include any justification about, let's say, behaviors in terms of cultural features or cultural components. Yes, see, we're coming back to that thing that I have just mentioned. How Colombian people tend to be unpunctual, yes, not very punctual. Why some other people, such as Japanese ones, tend to be polite to their teachers. There's a big difference in the level of status between teachers and other professions, teacher versus students, well, etc. Right? And then, the final one, that it's classify, categorize, compare, and contrast. We will see that we are going to require most of these different things when we are going to deal with descriptions. So the first one that we're going to cover right now in the lesson is the objective description, right? So remember that when we're mentioning, or when we're dealing with something that it's supposed to be objective, it should not include any of our opinions, right? It should not mention anything related to our perceptions or suggestions or things like that. Now we're supposed to describe, particularly in this case that is description, let's say as realistically as possible, as close to the truth and as close to the real facts as possible, right? So that is what we understand as objective in a general way. So where normally do you find this objective description, right? Well, very simple, in instructive, technical, or impartially informative or scientific text. The first two, the instructive and technical, well, it's really easy to be objectively descriptive in that. Think about a manual. Just put together a sofa or a library or these IKEA manuals or anything you buy on Jumbo for modular furniture or something like that. Well, those are descriptive, show you what you're required to do. Part A goes into part B, you have to do this first, then the second, and in the end you will obtain your sofa or your library or something like that. Put this bolt over here, put this metal part over there, hammer, screw, whatever you require. It is pretty descriptive to the point that many of those have even illustrations, drawings, yes, step-by-step things. The let's say the parts have are labeled with letters A, B, C, D, etc. And it's somehow easy to be objective in that way. Like it normally doesn't say, you know, I feel like you should organize this better, or the manual says A and B, but I feel as the author of this manual that you're supposed to, that you might want to put D and A, whatever, right? That doesn't happen. Yes, because if it would happen, so your furniture will be a mess, and you will be really pissed off because you did not receive clear, objective description of what you were supposed to be doing. Now, the other part is a little bit more difficult. Let's say that scientific texts, especially the ones with what we know as hard science, such as math, physics, engineering, biology, genetics, etc. That is still relatively easy to maintain a certain level of objectivity, right? Now let's take a look at the objectivity of our field, pedagogy and didactics. I don't know what my other colleagues will think about it, and maybe some of them will completely disagree with what I'm going to say. But I would say that normally didactics and pedagogical papers are not as objective as possible, right? Because this has a lot to do with the preferences of the researcher, with the experience, with let's say the school of thought that he or she feels more affiliated to, all these different things, right? But for me, that is okay. That's completely right, because we're not like manufacturing things. We're dealing with people. We're dealing with students that have like different interests and different backgrounds and different social status and levels and cognitive and etc. Right? So I don't think that in our field the lack of complete objectivity is let's say a failure or a mistake, but it's an opportunity if you manage it correctly, right? Because if you get too subjective, well, it wouldn't work, and it wouldn't make your paper and your research valid for everybody. That is what we would like. So, don't go too much on the other way. That's about the scientific one. Now the informative, and especially in our times, man, that's tough. It's difficult because the news, the news stations, the radio, TV news, newspapers, they are normally property of very big collectives, right? And these collectives are normally associated to the government or to a political party or to something like that. So, well, it's really difficult. It's really difficult to find this objectivity there, right? So think about any TV news chain, or something similar that is objective and is difficult. And I mean, it goes in both ways. Most of our let's say current news are manipulated somehow, or at least influenced. If you find the word manipulated too strong, at least influenced by their owners, and most of them are right-wing owners, right, and associated with big political and traditional parties. But then again, we have some alternative, let's say, news on the internet, on some independent TV channels and stuff like that. But even in those cases, you will find that they are not completely objective, and sometimes they also try to favor, let's say, their left-wing parties somehow. And that may seem like not so bad. We actually need a little bit of that, many people would say. Still, that doesn't make it like completely objective. So it's difficult to try to provide news, descriptive news, without putting a little bit of the author into the final news that are transmitted to the public. Well, so that about where we can find objective descriptions, or more or less. Normally, some of the characteristics is that it is generalized information, facts, qualities, and characteristics. You normally, in objective descriptions, provide this sort of information. They tend to be systematic, accurate, almost photographic. Yes, so if you're going to provide a description that is supposed to be objective, you are systematic. So what can be a systematic description of a person? Systematic description, an objective one. Well, you can start, for example, by describing his clothes or her clothes, then go on with his, let's say, body features, the length of his or her hair, the color, etc. And then you go with his emotions. Right? Systematic, something that you distribute and organize in a clearly anticipated way. Yes, you don't start by saying that she has blue eyes and she's nice and she usually wears skirts. That is not systematic, right? It's just a random enumeration of things. So systematic is to do it in that way, like to at least take each category. They're accurate. Try to provide as much information as possible in terms of, let's say, what really represents such person or animal or emotion or place. And it's almost photographic, so we're trying to provide a description that it's almost equivalent to a photograph, to a picture of what we are describing. Finally, as I mentioned before, let's say facts are really important. We are never going to transmit opinions or feelings or perceptions that are too subjective, because that would be completely opposite to what we're trying to do. So the author is simply an spectator in there, an observer, and he's reproducing what he sees or what he understands from this particular subject that is being described. Okay, so hopefully this is more or less clear. So we're going to the activity number 1, or to the assignment number 1 for this week. Okay, so first of all, remember what I mentioned before. I am not going to put anything on the assignment in Edmodo. I will say only watch the video and follow the instructions, so please close attention to what I'm going to say. So please, you go to the slide number 45 in the slides that we have, and you're supposed to do 3 different things, right? So the first one is describe the process to carry out a reading class for speakers of English as a second language. Okay, so imagine that you're going to prepare a reading class for practicum or for your classes, if any of you are working somehow already in a language center, etc. Right? So you're going to describe the process that is necessary to do so, right? you're going to do it in a list of maximum 5 steps. Okay. Now, let's say that it's not necessary to attach or to do something additional to this. You only have to name like the process. Imagine that one of the steps is provide a glossary so students understand in advance the text that they are going to read, right? You only need to enunciate that, you name it, but you don't need to, for example, attach the glossary. No, it's not necessary. So let's say we are going to read a fragment of Alice in Wonderland. That may be one step, right? So it's not necessary to attach the fragment or the excerpt. It's going to be only that way, okay? So hope it's clear. You're going to do that. Second one, describe the process by which rain is made possible. Okay, so this is a basic concept and let's say idea that we learn at school. Yes, the water cycle. So I hope that we don't even need to research about it, that it is clear enough in your mind in order to do that. If probably you didn't pay a lot of attention back then, well, I guess you will have to read or take a look at an infographics or something like that. But it's not rocket science. That's going to be quite easy. So please just enunciate the steps. As usual, I am going to ask you to use your own words. It's a pretty standard process, so everybody will have the same basic steps. So your description will be different, or let's say provide individual features in the words that you use and the way you phrase it. So please use your own words in here. Do not like look for how is the process of brain made possible and then you copy and paste. Don't do that, okay? Use your own words. You're trying to describe it. And finally, describe, well, that is in 5 steps maximum, right? And finally, describe a historical figure of your preference. A politician, soccer player, a sportsman, a singer, I don't know, an academic, a scientist, whoever you want to describe. Yes? But you are going to do it in a maximum of 5 sentences. Okay? So you can describe his personality, his achievements, his appearance. It's up to you. You have 5 sentences, so you select those that are most relevant for you and that you think that can fit in there. Okay? So that is what we're going to do with this exercise. Please, you are going to be working in groups of 4 people maximum. Yes, like if you want to work in groups or in 3 or 2, or you want to do it individual, that's up to you. But please work in groups that are no bigger than 4 people. Also, I wrote this information in some of your observations. It's important to repeat it one more time. Remember that normally when I grade these collective assignments, I only write comments to one of the students in the comments box, and well, the rest will only see the grade. But these comments are really important, so please share these comments with your classmates. Share with them what I say, what I suggest. If it's congratulations, well, great. If it's like some observations about something that can be improved, even better, right? Or even more important. So that is what we're going to be doing. That will be the assignment number 1 for this week. I think it's clear enough. Please try to respect the limits. Yes. Some of you write less, some of you write more. So try to stick to these 5 steps or 5 sentences, because that is like a way in which I can evaluate how good you are in order to condensate information and to make use of limited space, which is also an important ability, right? Especially in these times of pandemics. Okay. So that's it for our first assignment. Thank you very much then, and well, we'll see each other in the other video, in which we will discuss a little bit about subjective descriptions and how it is opposed to the one that we are just doing right now. Okay, so thank you very much. Great day, and bye bye, hugs.